Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Kylie if you're new, and today, oh my god, I'm doing a full review and a breakdown of the first season of Ratched. I have a little coffee for today's video because I'm gonna need the energy. This is gonna be a long one, I already know it. I literally have 10.5 pages of notes in size 10 font, not double spaced. So buckle up, grab a snack, grab a drink, kick back, relax, and let's get into it. So the first little bit of this review is gonna be spoiler free, just gonna give some general opinions first, and then I'm gonna get into spoilers, breaking down like the cast, the plot, like going episode by episode, all of that. So if you don't care about the spoiler free stuff, there will be a timestamp linked down below for when all the good stuff starts. So Ratched, this is created by Mr. Ryan Murphy, who is doing the most right now, and I'm not mad about it. But this received only a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's the synopsis. A young nurse at a mental institution becomes jaded and bitter before turning into a full-fledged monster to her patients. That is a synopsis I got off of Google, the internet. It is so incorrect. It's like, did the person who wrote that watch the show at all? We may never know, but it's really not accurate. Although I will say, you can't really post the true synopsis without ruining like the whole plot twist that happens kind of like in the first episode. Well, the whole entire show is full of a lot of twists, so I actually get why the synopsis is so awful. First thing, this show is not being received super well right now, especially by horror fans, and I think I know why. A lot of them say like it's not true horror, and like that's true, like it's not really. There is a good amount of gore, there's a lot of really dark stuff that goes on, but I wouldn't really call it horror. So the fact that horror fans are like, ugh, the show sucks, like it's not even scary or whatever, I don't think it was supposed to be. Also, another thing, I think that the loudest voices in the horror community tend to be men, and this show is not made for the men, okay? This show was made for the girls and the gays, and when I say the girls and the gays, that's kind of like a meme at this point, but the girls and the gays is basically just an umbrella term that kind of covers like everyone except for hetero men. So that's my theory as to why horror fans aren't into it, but I was really into it because I felt very catered to. As both a woman and someone who is not entirely straight, let's say, I felt very catered to by this show. Like, this show felt like it was for me. So I can understand why a lot of horror fans didn't like it. I also still don't really get why a lot of horror fans weren't into it. Like, this is a very, very psychological TV show, so I guess that being said, like, you do have to be really into psychological horror to like it, but I don't know. Next topic. This is a very emotionally complicated show. With almost every single character in the show, they do like a complete 180, and like every character's arc is extremely different from one another. All the plot twists and a lot of the characters' actions are like super unpredictable. So with some characters that you might hate in the beginning, you might love them at the end, and like the opposite is true as well. And sometimes it was really jarring because with some of them it was like gradual and it happened over the course of the show, and you're like, oh, like starting to kind of like slowly see them change. Others it's like a flip is nope. Others it's like a switch is flipped and you're like, hold on. So I think it was a really fun ride, both in terms of plot and with character development. Now, moving on to the style of this show, because girl, gorgeous. Almost every single shot is deliberately made with like a duochromatic vibe to it, so the tiniest little details will jump out to you. You can tell like so much detail went into this show, all in the name of making it visually appealing. And that being said, they could have gone the route of just making it a gorgeous thing to watch, and like, you know, like they could have gotten away with like a little bit less strong of a plot, but they didn't. This is just overall like a very, very well made, well done show. They also use the coloring to emit the characters' emotions. Like sometimes someone will be like walking down a hallway and then slowly all the coloring would like fade to green. So then you're like, oh my god, is this person jealous? Are they angry? They're feeling something. So with the style of this show, if you're a fan of the green stuff, I highly recommend using it before you watch the show. It will amplify the visuals and the experience tenfold, and it'll make you appreciate the visuals all the more. Like, you'll really notice the fact that in one shot they use like green and orange, or like red and blue, and they use colors from the opposite end of like the color wheel to make them pop and stuff. It's all very deliberate and looks amazing. Also, the setting of this show is gorgeous. It's the Bay Area circa like late 40s. It's amazing. Just a couple more topics for my spoiler-free section. I just want to briefly talk about a couple of the actors that stood out to me the most. Obviously, Sarah Paulson, like, do I even really need to talk about her? She is, how do you say, the most talented actor on television. Despite how talented, how incredibly talented everyone else on this show is, and they deserve credit too, she carries the show. It's just the way it is. It's the way that she is in anything that she's in. And that is that on that. I will say that Sophie Okonedo, where has this woman been? Why have I not seen her before? This, I think they've discovered a new talent. I mean, did she steal the show from Sarah Paulson? No, I don't think anyone ever could, but she came very close. The way she commanded attention when she was on the screen. Oh, wow. But the other person that stood out to me in this show was Finn Wittrock. I feel like he's kind of gotten to showcase his range a little bit on American Horror Story, but this was the first show that Mr. Murphy gave him where he had like a major main role. And I just thought it was about damn time because this man can act. So I don't know, I hope those people get awards of some kind for this show, but I think I'm just gonna do some general thoughts now to wrap up this spoiler-free section. So overall, I loved it. I felt so catered to, not only aesthetically, but like in terms of plot and the representation that we got. Not to mention how fascinating the plot was. I had such a good time watching this show. I loved all the crazy twists and turns that it took. The one gripe that I have about this show, the last episode of this first season is basically one big trailer for season 2. I don't like that. I really got my hopes up for the season finale because I was just like, we are gonna get some answers. This is gonna be so climactic. And some climactic stuff does happen. I just don't want you guys to get your hopes up and then be like, oh, that was such a stupid ending. So now you have been warned. Overall, I adored it, but if you haven't seen it yet, I think that you should click off and go watch it because this spoiler-filled section, it's gonna be really meaningless to you if you haven't watched the show yet. Okay. Just gonna take a quick break here. I don't even really like coffee that much. I just love oat milk. Highly recommend oat milk. You can find it at Trader Joe's. You can probably find it at like Ralph's or Vaughn's or whatever too. Oh, okay, so first topic of the spoiler-filled section, I'm gonna be talking about the cast and the actors that played like the main roles. I'm gonna get into like their arcs and like my opinions about each of the characters in sort of like a general sense, and then I will get into like the plot breakdown going like episode by episode and stuff. So let's start with Nurse Dolly, played by Alice Englert. She was one of those characters that started off as a background character and then flipped a complete 180 on me. She was one of the characters that flipped the frickin' switch. I was not ready for the havoc she was about to create in this show. And also that complete flip-flop, like, it's just the way that it was so surprising and yet so believable. Because really who in their right mind would be emotionally and sexually attracted to a serial killer? I just feel like I should have seen her becoming unhinged from like a mile away, but here we are. I honestly didn't really like her very much. Like from pretty early on, I disliked her character and I couldn't even like really tell you why. I mean, okay, so my dislike obviously started like when she started to have an attraction to Edmund. That was before like I knew who he was and more about his character, and I was like, this nerd is really like morally bankrupt. She doesn't know the first thing about ethics, like she is a bad person. And then I ended up never liking her. And to be honest, there was never a moment when I was rooting for her character. She pretty much was just a bad influence the entire time. And then she died. That was crazy. Now the performance by Alice though, amazing. I don't really recall seeing her in anything else either. There were some unknown faces in this first season of Ratched. I appreciated that. The whole like rooster neck snapping moment was noteworthy. I think it was in that moment in particular that we learned that she was not all there. Now I know that like it's a totally normal thing, like especially back then, or like if you're living on a farm and like you grow your own poultry and stuff to eat and stuff, I know that's normal, but for the general population that like has no idea how their meat is processed or where it comes from, that scene is very jarring. I don't think that a typical person would have the ability to snap a rooster's neck. I would literally have a panic attack and start crying. I wouldn't be able to do it. So in that moment I was like, okay, something is off with her. It was also in that moment that we realized that Edmund is not the person we thought he is at all, because he was like, we have to kill it. So I guess let's just move on to Edmund. Okay, Finn Wittrock, we already know. A talent, a talent. Now, Mr. Murphy had given him some roles in AHS, but this was like his first lead role in a Mr. Murphy show. I mean, I guess like the assassination of Gianni Versace, no, he wasn't really lead in that. And in most seasons of AHS, he has more of like a side character, except I will say he did demonstrate his range in Freak Show. You can feel free to hate the character of Dandy, I do, but you have got to admit that it took talent to play that weird ass spoiled man baby. So this character of Edmund really took me on a ride. Definitely had I don't even want to say that his arc flipped a 180 because it kind of went like it went all over the place. We literally started the show with him brutally murdering like 5 priests. It's quite a way to set the tone, especially with a character, because now you're like, oh, this dude is definitely the bad guy. But then of course, as you learn like his backstory and like the trauma that he went through and stuff and all the abuse that he suffered, you're starting to get it. The pieces are starting to fall in place. But then when he runs away with Dolly and he kills that guard, oh my god, I hated that so much. But then there's the scene with the rooster and you're like, oh wait, he has empathy for animals. That's like the opposite of, you know, like what a psychopath would feel, right? Because psychopaths don't feel things. And then he tries to take the fall for Dolly and you're like, oh my god, okay, are you a good person? I mean, no, but you don't know. I'm a little excited, it's the caffeine, okay? I'll get more into like the abuse storyline and stuff later. I'm gonna move on to the next character. Luis, I'm just gonna touch upon briefly. I'm sorry, I'm just like not really a fan of Amanda Plummer. The only other thing that I've seen her in is Hunger Games Catching Fire. She plays Wiress, and that's the best Hunger Games movie by a mile. But the one thing that didn't really work for me about it was Wiress. I thought that maybe they just like told her to play Wiress like that. I don't know what it was about the performance that I wasn't into, but like it wasn't clicking for me. And the same thing happened for me with this show. I was like, something is not clicking with her character. Unfortunately, Amanda Plummer is the Unfortunately, Amanda Plummer is the common denominator. She just has this quirky kind of vibe that's like not endearing whatsoever, and it just doesn't really ever feel like it meshes well with the moment that she's in. There is an exception though. I did think that it worked in the scene where she and Nurse Bucket were drinking, and I will get to that later because I need to talk about that. I'm actually just gonna move on to Nurse Bucket right now because I don't really want to keep talking about Louise. She was played by Judy Davis. Again, deserves all the accolades. She's an Australian actress. Didn't hear a peep of her Australian accent coming through, not at all. This woman is a talent. And again, this character took me on a developmental ride. In the beginning, I thought she was really annoying, and then by the end, I was like, oh my god, she's my girl. At first, she was totally under the spell of Dr. Hanover and was really annoying and was like one of those women that, you know, wants to impress a man, so she puts down other powerful women. Ugh. I was like, ugh, okay, she's one of those. But then she went through a lot of growth, because once that spell that Dr. Hanover had cast in her mind lifted, she started working with the other women around her and like came into her power. We love seeing women overcome their feelings for men and become successful. Speaking of powerful women, let's talk about Cynthia Nixon as Miss Gwendolyn Brooks. It's Briggs. Her name is Gwendolyn Briggs, but I say Brooks so many times before I correct myself, so I'm sorry. Do we realize the importance of her subplot? How important a role she played in this story? Do we understand the weight on this woman's shoulders in terms of the thematic elements she carried in this show? There is so much that she symbolizes in terms of like the oppression of women in the LGBT community and all that stuff. She pulled it off. She did it well. She did it for us. She represented us. This show would not have been what it was without Miss Gwendolyn Brooks. And I love that that was a huge thematic element of this show, because like the late 40s and 50s and 60s are so glorified because they were like the simpler times or whatever. But do you know why they were like the simpler times or whatever? Because society was so homogenous, because people who were different were bullied into conforming to societal norms. So the feminine empowerment that I felt from this show because of Miss Gwendolyn Brooks. Oh my god, Briggs, Gwendolyn Briggs. Like, she was an example of a woman who was strong enough to be herself back then despite whatever repercussions might come her way. That's bravery, okay? And she was the blueprint. She was the blueprint for the girls and the gays like me. Women like her from back then deserve all the respect because they are the reason why society was able to like progress. It's women like her who offered like a stepping stone for younger generations to progressively get weirder and weirder and just like be themselves with no shame. Because look at us now, dude. Look at my hair. Look at me. So in conclusion, Gwendolyn Brooks, lesbian icon, thank you for your service. Now moving on briefly to Miss Lenore Osgood. This woman. Oh my goodness. Spilled coffee on my inner thigh. So anyways, Miss Lenore Osgood. You guys, I'm pretty sure that this is what Jeffree Star thinks he looks like. I'm pretty sure this is the energy that like he thinks he omits. You know what I mean? I mean, this woman is the definition of high society, the definition of wealth. Her house, like the production design was so gorgeous, and the costuming for her, I couldn't believe, I was in awe. But I also felt like the whole plot with her wanting Dr. Hanover's head was really weird. Her relationship with her son was super weird. I didn't fully understand her motivations because I'm like, at this point, you have all the money in the world, your son's arms and legs are not gonna grow back. Why are you so fixated on this doctor? Like, what else, like, what else is he gonna do to you? She just felt like a very classic villain. I mean, she had a pet monkey, for fuck's sake. So her issue with Dr. Hanover and her leaving all her money to her monkey, that was nuts. I'll get to that later. Let's just move on to Dr. Hanover. This man, John Briones, is talented, okay? He also starred in the assassination of Gianni Versace, and he was excellent in that as well. His arc, though, was weird. It was another one of those that like wasn't a 180, it was like a I don't know. First of all, he was doing lobotomies on people. It's really hard to look at that and be like, you know, they're in the late 40s. They think that this is okay. They think this is like groundbreaking new medicine. They don't know how fucked up this is. So from the get-go, I was like, okay, he's not like a bad guy. He's just maybe a little like... But then there's like the suicide of his patient and he covers it up, and like his motivations are a little sketch. But then as the show moves on, you realize that it was not really his fault that the rich kid lost all of his limbs. You realize that he has a daughter that he lost custody of that by all appearances seemed like he really loved her. Seemed like she was kind of the motivation for why he was trying to help other people, sorta. Because, you know, he wanted to provide for her, and he also was genuinely trying to help Charlotte. And it was like for his own personal gain, more or less, but he did genuinely care about curing people. Which, speaking of Charlotte, okay, let's just move to her. Sophie Okonedo, we already know. We need to keep an eye on her. I want to see what she does next. Even though this is the only role I've seen her play, she demonstrated her range, sometimes in a single scene. To be able to switch up your entire persona, your body language, and your accent mid-scene, do you know how hard that is? I feel like I kind of already covered her in just like her presence and like her performance. In terms of her arc, I think she had one of the most tragic storylines that I've seen for a character before. But then again, like it did highlight the truth of the time period that they were living in. Especially with her story, the origin story of her mental illness, as well as when she and Dr. Hanover are in the cafe and the nurse says something about like, you people have to pay up front. I appreciated the accuracies. Her arc was kind of hard to track because she had dissociative identity disorder. She was not always the same person. But right off the bat, the very first scene that she is in, oh my god, like the way that she commanded that scene. I was like, who is this? What the hell is going on? Who is this woman? It more or less was exactly the drama that I needed. She was the character that I needed, and she really like catapulted the show from being like a semi-typical mystery to bam, she is a whole new element. She helped carry the show, but as we already know, the woman who did in fact actually carry this show is Miss Sarah Paulson. Miss Sarah Paulson has done it again. It's just the way that she never says no to a lesbian smoking role, and I love that for her. She's one of those actresses that I feel like is really defying ageism in the movie industry, because since the dawn of forever, youth has just been like worshipped and so valued in Hollywood to a point where sketchy things happen, we know this. I feel like Sarah Paulson is one of the first women to really defy all the ageist bullshit that happens in Hollywood, because she's not old. Oh my god, I'm not saying she's old, she's literally only 45. But if you're a woman in Hollywood, they start to forget about you after you turn like 30. Few women are able to defy this sort of barrier. You know, you got Viola Davis, you got Meryl Streep, those types of women. Sarah Paulson has proven herself to be one of those women. But I don't think I need to tell you things that you probably already know, so let's talk about her arc. She was one of the most confusing characters for me, to be honest. In the beginning, I thought she was like the bad guy. She was not likable at all. She was very obviously like a repressed lesbian. She was blackmailing people left and right. She had this weird relationship with Edmund that we didn't understand. Just overall very sus. Oh, and she gave a priest a lobotomy. And then by the end, she's helped all these underprivileged people and other women, and you're like, queen? Which briefly, I loved the character of Huck. I didn't really talk about him because he's not really a main character, but that was a cute subplot. So anyways, she was just a super confusing character because her actions were so sus. But then you learn about the abuse that she went through and then like how she's trying to help Edmund, the way that like he's kind of her brother. And it makes you realize that her intentions are a little more pure than you would have initially believed, but she was also okay with giving people lobotomies, killing people, you know, and I just don't think the ends really justified those means. She also gives Dr. Hanover's head to Lenore, but that only happened because she helped Charlotte escape and like helped Charlotte get away. So she's helping all these people, but then like literally killing some people and like covering up other murders. She's very morally ambiguous, and like I guess by the final episode she hasn't exactly redeemed herself, but she has become someone worth rooting for because she actually teams up with like these other women. She expresses her feelings explicitly to Gwendolyn, like their relationship is going great. She like gives her all this money from Lenore to like treat her breast cancer. Her actions lead to Nurse Bucket being the head of the hospital. I don't know, like does all of that justify all of her previous actions? Maybe you guys should chime in, let me know your thoughts on that down below. I'm curious to know what you think about that. So that's all I wanted to talk about in terms of the characters, but now I want to talk about some of the themes that were brought up in this show. I already talked about how I felt well represented in this show with the women and like the relationship of Gwendolyn and Nurse Ratched. I don't feel like I need to go over that again, but there are some other like LGBT issues that are kind of like thematically brought up in the show as well. This show dove into the topic of conversion therapy, which I have not personally seen before. It's pretty difficult subject matter. I don't know if it's like triggering for some people, but I think it kind of perfectly towed the line of showing the horror of it and like the truth of it. And when I say the truth of it, what I mean is like the way in which it didn't work but appeared like it did because of the test results. They're essentially trying to torture someone into not being gay. The example we were shown in the show is the boiling and freezing baths. And of course the girl that went through this treatment is gonna lie and say that all of her like lesbian urges have like gone away because she doesn't want to go through that treatment again. No one wants to be tortured, so of course she's gonna be like, yeah, I'm all cured now, not gay anymore. I don't need to be boiled alive again. Nope, I'm good. This was never explicitly stated that it didn't work, but we did get a lot of close-ups of this girl's face as she was talking to Nurse Bucket. You can clearly tell she's terrified. She doesn't want to go through that process again. So that was interesting and highlighted some of our country's more like gruesome past. Or is it the past because some LGBT rights are like under fire right now in 2020? So that theme was actually very relevant. On that note, definitely check out the petitions and the GoFundMe's links down below. But I'm gonna move on to the next thematic element of mental health. So as far as Charlotte's character, I think that it really highlighted the intolerance that used to be so alive and well back then, and honestly, in some places, still is alive and well. But as far as her dissociated identities go, I found it really off-putting that one of them was an extremely violent anti-Hitler persona. Now, it's a TV show. I think that things, you know, certainly need to be dramatized to an extent. But generally, people with dissociative identity disorder are not violent. Some symptoms are self-harm and self-destructive behavior, but this hardly ever includes being violent towards others. So it's a great plot point. It did help add drama to the show, but it's like not the best moment in terms of mental health awareness. But the show did seem a lot more aware in other aspects of mental illness, like the lobotomies. We had a front row show to a couple of those, and the sound design and the visuals and stuff, oh, it really just highlighted how horrifying those are. And then we got to see the aftermath of the way that they just didn't work. And in some cases, put people in a catatonic state. So this show kind of functioned to show us how stupid we used to be and how experimental medicine was, or is? Next topic, want to briefly touch upon politics. The character of Governor George Wilburn, I think he perfectly embodies a lot of US politicians, or just like capitalist politicians in general. Someone who doesn't actually care about his constituents but cares about maintaining an image and maintaining power. Oh, and he's super sexist and sexually harasses women. Reminds me of a certain man with coronavirus. So basically, with all those thematic elements in mind, I just think this show could not be more relevant. Okay, now, finally, I'm going to be getting into the plot. We're gonna go episode by episode and my opinions on like the major plot points. I'm just gonna give you guys a quick refresher of what happened in each episode and then kind of break down my opinions. I am also just reading these off of Wikipedia. So in 1947, Edmund Tullison murders 4 priests, one of which he claims to be his father. 6 months later, he is arrested and sentenced to 120 days in Lucia State Hospital, a mental institution in Northern California. Mildred Ratched steals the position of a nurse in the same hospital through blackmail. While Governor George Wilburn visits the hospital for funding, Ratched pulls a stunt by dosing an old patient with blood pressure reducing medicine. When the patient suffers a cardiogenic shock, Ratched saves him in front of the press and the governor. She then provokes Salvatore, an abandoned patient, to die by suicide in Dr. Hanover's office. Ratched assures Dr. Hanover the concealment of the incident, gaining his trust. When Edmund arrives in the hospital, he and Ratched embrace. So to kick it off with Miss Mildred, she forces a patient into cardiogenic shock. She convinces another one to commit suicide. She covers it up, and she embraces the serial killer from the beginning of the episode. Not a great start for Mildred. I was pretty iffy about this first episode, honestly. I was like, am I gonna be into this show? Because our protagonist is like super unlikable and like not really worth rooting for, it seems. But the one thing about it is that it ended on a total cliffhanger and it left me so hooked. This is just the type of show, and this happened with literally every episode. They all ended on a cliffhanger, so you basically were forced to binge. But this first episode kind of just like set up the rest of the season, which just, that's how it goes. So I don't have a ton of notes on this first one. So moving on to episode 2. Dr. Hanover performs a lobotomy on a subject which fails. He then introduces a more convenient procedure involving an ice pick. Ratched visits Father Andrews, a survivor and witness of Edmund's murders, and convinces him to interview with Dr. Hanover. Gwendolyn Briggs? Wait, oh no. Oh my god, her name is Gwendolyn Briggs, not Gwendolyn Brooks. My bad, okay. Gwendolyn Briggs, the governor's campaign manager, takes Ratched to a women's club in Monterey. She's offended by being mistaken for a lesbian and leaves. Father Andrews agrees on interviewing with Dr. Hanover. Ratched takes him to a motel room and records his confession, claiming to do so for Dr. Hanover. She sedates him and, after revealing that Edmund is her brother, performs the ice pick procedure on him. The procedure puts Father Andrews in a state of catatonia. First of all, it's crazy that Dr. Hanover went from like, yeah, you just drill a hole in the patient's head and you move some stuff around and voila, to, yeah, you just use an ice pick and you hear it crack and then you wiggle it around a little bit. Not making Dr. Hanover any more likable in this episode. Actually, no one became more likable in this episode. I actually started to hate Ratched more because when they went to the club and she was like, I'm not one of you. It's like, okay, first of all, rude, and second of all, you're repressing your own gayness. Like, you're gay. Don't take it out on everybody else because you're in denial, you know what I mean? So I didn't like that, but it was an essential moment in their relationship development. The lobotomy on the priest, however, I still don't understand that. I get posing as the interviewer to like get him to trust her and like come to her room, but then she actually recorded it. Why would you actually record it? That's a majorly weird plot point to me because the only thing that it served was like Bucket finding out about it later and like finding the tape, but why on earth would she record that in the first place? If you have a guess or if you know, comment down below. Sorry if the lighting is any different. I just had an appointment with my faculty advisor over Zoom. I'm about to graduate and be done with college in December. So apologies, that took a little while. Okay, get back into it. Also with the priest and the lobotomy thing, why would she need to tell him that he's her brother? It made positively no sense to tell the priest that. And then lobotomize him. But I was surprised by that development. I think again, I probably should have seen something like that coming, but I didn't. Like I didn't know what to expect, like why she had this relationship with Edmund. Slight tangent, when they do flashbacks of them as like younger kids and stuff, they look like they're roughly the same age, but Sarah Paulson is about 10 years older than Finn Whitrock, so I don't like, were they supposed to be the same age? I don't know. Let's move on to episode 3. This is where we really start cooking. Wainwright, a PI, visits Lenore Osgood with the news that Hanover is an alias for Manuel Banyaga, who was responsible for the mutilation of her son Henry that rendered him limbless. She hires Wainwright to kill Hanover. Hanover develops a new therapy that involves immersing patients in excessively hot water. Ratched learns that Nurse Dolly is having sexual relations with Edmund. Hanover escapes an assassination attempt. In her hotel room, Ratched sleeps with Wainwright. Ratched asks Hanover why he's being hunted, and he explains how he caused Henry's injuries in a botched procedure after being drugged by him. Ratched offers to help him hide. Now, this was the episode where I was like, okay, I'm obsessed. This is where things start to get more complicated. Now, we already talked about the whole conversion therapy stuff, so I'm not gonna get back into that, but Nurse Dolly begins her relationship with Edmund. At this point, you still think he's a lunatic, but now he's a lunatic and Mildred's brother. That was really off-putting because up until this point, you hadn't witnessed any humanity from him, and he had just manipulated this nurse into well, you know, in front of the security guard down there. Ugh. But the highlight of this episode has to be, for me, when Hanover is telling Mildred about what happened to his former patient. First of all, let's talk about the psychedelic element of it, because this was simultaneously very accurate but very inaccurate as well. Again, they have to dramatize things, but I have never heard of a story of someone trying to harm themselves like that while tripping on only 20 micrograms of LSD. Cutting off your arms, for a reaction like that to LSD, you have to have some sort of really serious pre-existing mental health condition. And especially at that small of a dose. Like, an average dose of a tab is 100 micrograms. He only took 20. But him drugging the doctor with 4,000 micrograms, oh my god. His experience seemed pretty accurate with that, like time going by super slowly, him just not being able to move whatsoever and being stuck to the floor. While I don't necessarily appreciate psychedelics being used as a horror element, because I think that just like further stigmatizes them and like perpetuates people's fear of them, I also thought it worked really well because the visuals of that scene were so good. That was an excellent time for me. I had to look away when he was like cutting off his arms and stuff. That was a little bit too much for me, but a very intriguing highlight of the like entire season. Moving on to episode 4. The governor is eager to see Edmund deemed fit for trial due to the upcoming election. Dolly confesses her attraction to dangerous men to Ratched, who offers to arrange a meeting. Hanover is self-medicating with sodium pentothal. Huck Finnegan sabotages the hot tubs to prevent another patient from being abused. King. Wainwright continues to search for Hanover and Mildred offers to help. They sleep together again and Gwendolyn overhears. Mildred and Huck help the two patients whom Hanover had been abusing to escape. Mildred sneaks Wainwright into the hospital and he makes his way into Hanover's office, but Hanover manages to knock him unconscious. Wainwright is locked into a boiling iron tub by Mildred and Hanover, but manages to break free. He is then killed by the hospital guard. Ratched contacts Osgood to tell her that Wainwright is dead and suggests she come to Lucia herself. Huck tells Mildred she's an angel of mercy for helping the two patients escape, causing Ratched to have a flashback to when she euthanized a suffering soldier. So this was the episode when things started to sorta turn around for me in my outlook of Nurse Ratched. Oh my god. The whole setting up Edmund and Dolly, that kind of seemed like a humane service she was providing. The motivations weren't totally clear to me, but then they became more clear later. Sort of. Still a weird subplot. Now, when Mildred slept with Wainwright again, like, she was trying to prove to herself and Gwendolyn that she wasn't gay. It was annoying, like it was necessary for her character development, but whatever, didn't like it. But this was also the episode where I was like, wait, is she the good guy? She saved her fellow gays from conversion therapy, and then she helped boil Wainwright, but it was in an effort to save Hanover's life. And at this point, Hanover doesn't seem totally evil. He seems more like the victim in this whole Lenore and her son Henry, that whole entanglement. But her motivations with that are still really unclear, so you're confused. But then you see her put a soldier out of his misery, and honestly, that was an act of mercy, at least in my eyes. Didn't seem like murder. So now she's kind of starting to seem like a good person, but there's a lot of irony contained in the fact that she murdered a soldier, but it really was like granting him mercy. The ethics of that are too complicated to get into, honestly. So let's move to episode 5. Ratched blackmails Hanover to find Edmund not fit for trial and to make her head nurse. She instructs Edmund to act insane during the upcoming dance. An extremely agitated Charlotte Wells is admitted with multiple personality disorder. Edmund asks Mildred to provide him with a knife for the dance, saying he will cut himself as part of convincing everyone that he's insane. Hanover has a breakthrough with Charlotte and later weeps from the emotional intensity of the experience. Bucket, misled by Mildred, pursues a romantic relationship with Hanover. Hanover spots Osgood talking to him and goes to Mildred for help. Mildred meets with Osgood and agrees to kill Hanover. At the dance, Hanover loses patience and tells Bucket how much he hates her. Edmund murders the guard and escapes with Dolly, who shoots Gwendolyn. This was my favorite episode of the entire show. 3 reasons. This is the episode where we were introduced to Miss Charlotte Wells. The energy we needed. Okay. Second reason, the hypnotism scene. To be honest, I had dabbled in the green stuff prior to watching this episode, and so I was in a relaxed, great state of mind, and when that hypnosis scene started, I was vexed, dude. I was into it. And I was also on my boyfriend's bed. We were all like snuggled up. I was super comfy. I literally started to fall asleep. Like, I think I was starting to actually get hypnotized by that scene. It wasn't until they cut away from that like spinning thing that I was like, whoa, whoa. Maybe that's weird to admit, I don't care. And the third reason, Dr. Hanover's dancing during his warped state of mind, if you will. That was a trip. The visuals like mimicked the way that he was kind of perceiving the world, and it was so hilarious. So it was super enjoyable in terms of like the visuals and kind of the comedic aspects of the episode. The main plot, however, made me mad. The fact that Dolly convinced Edmund to break out with her is like probably one of the stupidest things that he could have done. The plan to hurt himself in the way that they depicted, also not the best plan and triggering. Jesus. And poor Charlotte, like she had to go through the most. Edmund killed the guy that she was dancing with right in front of her. And later she said that the guard was like the first person that kind of made her feel normal and didn't look at her like she was crazy or anything. And I just like, my heart was breaking for poor Charlotte. However, one good thing about this episode is we start to see the shift in Nurse Bucket. It is awful that it took Hanover yelling at her like that and like publicly embarrassing her like that, but it was kind of the wake-up call she needed. Sometimes getting hung up on a man is literally the worst thing that can happen to a powerful woman, and this was the moment that set off the chain reaction of her getting her power back. We also have the first moment where she and Mildred kind of like connect in a way that they hadn't before, and this was the start of their relationship getting closer and them like combining their powers. Okay, moving on to episode 6. Edmund and Dolly hide in an abandoned farmhouse. Gwendolyn regains consciousness in the hospital. Mildred begins to have feelings for Gwendolyn, and she flashes back to her horrific childhood while watching a puppet show with her and causes a scene. Later she confesses to Gwendolyn that Edmund is her brother. Edmund and Dolly are captured, but Dolly tries to shoot it out with the police but dies in the gunfight. Edmund is returned to the hospital in chains. The governor is furious and convinces Hanover to certify Edmund fit for trial. He also cuts the hospital funding and fires Gwendolyn. When Gwendolyn got shot in the last episode, I was scared. I was like, no, 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 no. Mildred is finally coming to terms with the nature of her attraction to Gwendolyn. This is bad. So when she woke up in this episode and Mildred like told her feelings, I was like, thank God. This is also the episode in which we have the shift for Edmund and we find out that he is like not actually a nutball. We also learn the past abuse of Mildred and Edmund. That was a very dark moment. I think that the retelling of it through the puppet show like did it a service because it made it a little bit less dark than it could have been if it was more like explicitly shown just like only through flashbacks. So I like that they sort of intermingled the flashbacks with the actual puppet show. All of that backstory was really helpful in putting things into perspective for Edmund and Mildred and why they have the motivations that they do. And now you're like, man, so these people are perhaps not evil, just victims of terrible circumstances. But as for the gunfight with Dolly and the police, for what? Why couldn't she just go along with the fact that Edmund said that he kidnapped her? She could still be alive. Why did she commit suicide by police? I didn't really like Dolly, so I didn't mind her dying, but I'm like, did they just not want to bring her back for season 2? Is that why? Or are they just trying to emphasize that they were like seriously like crazy in love? Or perhaps it was meant to juxtapose the fact that Edmund is not actually crazy and she was far crazier by comparison. Who's to say? Moving on to episode 7. Bucket learns about the relationship with Mildred and Edmund and how Mildred lobotomized Father Andrews to silence him. She confronts Mildred, who confesses that she was kicked out of the army for euthanizing soldiers. Bucket is sympathetic though and agrees that Edmund should not be executed. They meet with a wealthy benefactor and arrange for the continuing support of the hospital and for Hanover to be reported to the police. Mildred helps Hanover escape along with Charlotte. While hiding in a motel, Charlotte has a psychotic break and kills Hanover. When she recovers, she calls Mildred for help. Mildred helps Charlotte escape and collects Hanover's head to give to Osgood. Osgood shows the head to Henry and then he has his butler kill her. Mildred tells Gwendolyn she loves her. Gwendolyn tells Mildred that she has terminal cancer. Osgood's will leaves her estate to her pet monkey and specifies that Henry is to be put in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life. Bucket takes over as head of the hospital, naming Huck as head nurse. Before I get into anything else, in this episode we learn that Nurse Bucket and Louise are friends. And I just... Of course these crazy ass women are friends, of course. Loved that. But anyways, when Nurse Bucket confronts Mildred, that's when I thought things were really gonna start to go south, but no. These two powerful women decide to team up, and I love it. Now, I wasn't rooting for the death of Hanover necessarily, but was I mad when Mildred collected his head and then took it to Lenore? No, because she didn't murder him, it was an accident, so why not collect that coin? That's a little ethically like, ugh, but then she helps Charlotte escape. So by this point, I was actually fully rooting rooting for Mildred. But the part of that episode that left so much more to be desired is when Henry was presented the head and then had his mother murdered. For what? We don't know. He really reminds me of Dandy from Freak Show, actually. And then all her money was left to the monkey. Like, and as far as Henry goes, that's one of the strongest and yet weakest villain origin stories I've ever heard. And then that's the last we see of him. So, moving on to episode 8. Edmund is scheduled for execution by electric chair. Mildred and Gwendolyn appeal to the governor for mercy to no avail. They meet with Bucket and Mildred suggests a plan wherein she will kill Edmund herself humanely. Charlotte appears at the hospital believing herself to be Hanover and swears to save Edmund from execution. She finds a gun in Hanover's desk and becomes aggressive, killing Huck and a guard. She frees Edmund, who then takes the guard's gun and forces Bucket to tell him Mildred's plan. He and Charlotte escape, later taking motel owner Louise on as an accomplice. 2 years later, Edmund calls, having tracked her, Bucket, and Gwendolyn to Mexico and promises to kill her, but not before Mildred tells him she'll find him first. This episode pissed me off because, like I said, it's basically just a trailer for season 2. Huck did not deserve that, for one thing. Also, I hate that Charlotte was used as the tool to help Edmund escape. I wish he figured that out on his own and Charlotte just wasn't going through all of this. But the story is more interesting that way. Also, the fact that they team up with Louise, what? What an absolutely backwards way to keep her on for season 2. Whatever. Like, why would she be on the team against Bucket? Okay. And then the whole 2 years goes by thing just kind of feels like a cop-out for season 2 propaganda, because what Mr. Murphy likes to do is start his story very close to the end of it and then take you through like flashbacks that give you the exposition of like what's going on in the present. So I'm guessing we'll have some of that 2-year gap filled in during season 2. But that's the end of the season. I have been recording for almost 2 hours at this point. I hope I can trim this down to be less than an hour long because that would be too long. I don't really have any expectations for season 2. I think it's going to be very, very different from season 1, but in what way? I don't know how. Season 1 overall was very unpredictable, but honestly, I loved it. Even if I didn't like the ending, that's kind of just the way that it goes with a lot of Ryan Murphy shows, unfortunately. Like, the endings are just not very strong in comparison to how much like plot building and twists and stuff there are like in the rest of the story. So yeah, and I also have no idea how long it's gonna take until we get season 2. My guess is it'll probably be like at least 1.5 years, but that just about does it. I am very curious to know all of your thoughts down below. I know that a lot of people really didn't like this show, and so I'm curious to know why. Unless it has something to do with the fact that this is like not a true horror show, I'm not interested. But that wraps us up for today. If you want to follow me on social media, my Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, and Depop are all at KaiJohns. On Instagram, I always tell you guys what movies I'm watching so you can watch them as well, just in case I do a review of them soon. I also post other horror news as well as like my movie stacks and stuff like that. On Depop, I'm selling some movies for my collection, so check that out if you're interested. My Twitter is all over the place. It's mainly for activism, so I don't know how interested you'll be in that, but on that note, check out those petitions and GoFundMes and whatnot down below. I also have a vlog channel where I post like random miscellaneous content and like my travels and whatnot. I posted a decorating for Halloween with me if you're interested. That will also be linked down below. And if you're new here and you made it to the end, might as well click that subscribe button and the notification bell, because then that way you'll be notified every single time that I post. I post every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and I currently have a Halloween series going on as well as a Nightmare on Elm Street series. But that's it. This is the end of my extremely long video. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope I catch you in the next one. Bye!